All right, everybody. Hello. Today is Wednesday, December 6th. This is the Cluster API weekly meeting, and we'll go ahead and get started. Are there any new attendees that are joining us this week? If you want to, now's the time to introduce yourself. Hey, Derek.
Hi, everybody. I'm Derek. I'm a software engineer. My last role was a full stack engineer, and excited to contribute. I've also
Awesome. Welcome.
some other SIG groups. I've been working with Minikube.
Very cool. Thank you. Welcome, and thanks for joining us, Derek. Nice to meet you.
Right. Yeah, I'll do a quick intro as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Daniel. I'm a software engineer. I'm interested in contributing to the project, so I'm just starting to drop in on some of the meetings and kind of see what's going on in the landscape.
Cool. Awesome. It's good to have you on board here, Daniel. Glad you could make it today. All right. Anybody else? Last call. All right. So let's go ahead and let's see if we have any open proposals that we need to be reading out. I'm actually sharing my screen. I should be doing that. Oh, disable screen sharing. I might need to be the host, Mike. Unless you want to share the agenda. Sorry. All right. Let's see. There are no open proposals this week, it looks like, for us to review. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the discussion topics.
You should be able to share, Richard, if you want.
Okay. Oh yeah, I just got the button. There we go. Sweet.
Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't realize you weren't the host.
No, you're fine, man. You're fine. This is largely a me issue, I think. So, all right. So we'll move on to the discussion topics. If anyone has any topics they want to add to the agenda, feel free to go ahead and do so. I'll drop a link to the meeting in the chat. If it's not already been done, there you go. If anyone has any topics they want to add, go ahead. Anyone from the release team on that wants to speak to the discussion topics related to the release team?
Yep, I can give an update here. Hi, everyone. Yes, so Cluster API minor release v1.6.0 is out. We cut the minor release yesterday. Additionally, 2 patch releases, v1.5.4 and v1.4.9 are out. So I just wanted to give a shout out to all release team members. It was an honor to lead this release team. I learned a lot in this release cycle, and I'd like to thank all the members of the release team, community, and maintainers. Thank you very much. That's awesome. The first one. Yeah. And the second one is release team retro meeting happening. We scheduled it for Friday, December 8th, 7 p.m. EET, EST. You can convert it to your time zone. And that would be hosted using the same Zoom link. So please come join and give your thoughts about this release cycle. That's it. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. That's awesome work. Really do appreciate it. Appreciate the update there. It's a reasonably light agenda today. Are there any provider updates that folks wanted to provide while we got everybody here on the phone? Doesn't sound like it. Are there any feature group updates? All right. There any other topics folks want to raise while we have everybody here to call? So it's probably the end of the year. The agenda's getting lighter, but just want to give folks the opportunity.
Yeah, is there a way to get set up with the environment for some future PRs and issues?
That is a great question. Is there anyone that would be willing to field that one?
Well, I raised my hand. I wasn't going to respond to that, but I can respond to that. if you look at the quick start section of the book that we have for Cluster API, there's instructions there on how to get started with like a local kind environment. And then there are also instructions for several cloud providers, including like running on a Docker provider locally. So I would think depending on which providers you want to work on, you might need to be set up with those providers, but setting up the core should be fairly easy to do with Kind. Yeah, and if you look in the chat, Stephen has kindly shared a link there. That's where I would start. I think getting it running with Kind is really easy, and then you can kind of inspect all the different controllers and all the CRDs and everything. And then, like I said, if you want to work with a specific provider, then at that point you probably want to set up that provider's specific part. But if you just want to work on the core parts of Cluster API, that's also a great place to get started.
I can say as a relative noob myself, Derek, that's what I did. The Docker provider is a really good way to test out and do some experimentation and learning. That's what I did when I first started working on this project.
Okay. Is there anyone I can reach out to later? In case I want to, sync everything.
The Cluster API channel and Kubernetes Slack might be a good place to start. I think with that, sure, somebody out there would be willing to help for sure. All right, Mike, I think you've got one here.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I just added another topic to the agenda since we have time, and it's something I've been thinking about recently. Anyways, I just kind of wanted to, I don't know, just chit chat about it. So I've been reading up on machine pools a lot recently. And the context here is in reference to like the Carpenter integration that we're kind of exploring through the feature group. Machine pools seem like a really useful thing for that type of integration, but I realized that they're like an experimental feature right now, and it sounded like maybe the future of machine pools might change or something. And I was curious if anybody here had any insight into kind of the future of machine pools, or maybe people had thoughts about what they'd like to see the future of machine pools be. I don't know. Yeah, Jack, please.
Hey, thanks, Mike. And yeah, shout out to the Carpenter conversations ongoing. We talked about this last week. Just a reminder to everyone, we have the I think a bi-weekly at this point Carpenter feature group. It's lively. We're still, is it fair to say, Mike, that we're still at the point where we have no idea what we're doing? So it's a great time to join. You'll have influence from the ground up.
Absolutely.
So yeah, about your machine pool question, I think I'm not aware. I'm sitting with a bunch of my colleagues here at Microsoft. I'm not sure we're aware if there's anything that we anticipate is going to change in the machine pool spec or the implementation. So I think it's a reliable surface area to build on top of. So that answers one. Does that answer one of your questions?
Kind of. Like, I guess like one of the things I'm thinking about and kind of speculating at, looking at the machine pool implementation, is like, it seems to have a lot of information that Carpenter wants. And, there might need to be like an improvement in the API contract there, but it seems like there might be a way for us to build on top of that to provide like a hook for providers to say, hey, look, if you would like to provide like some sort of Carpenter integration, this might be a place to do it. Now, I don't want to get too off the weeds in the Carpenter stuff, because that's probably best left for the feature group. But I was thinking in that direction with the machine pools. So like it just kind of looked like it had everything that Carpenter was kind of asking for.
Okay, cool. I'm going to pass over to Cecile, who has something to say about that.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Hey.
Awesome.
Okay. Jack and I are sitting right next to each other, which is fun, but yeah, we're not used to it. Okay. So I was just gonna say, yeah, I'd love to start a conversation maybe like in the next month or so about graduating machine pools. I think there's one big obstacle in my mind that's still standing in the way, which is what we've been looking at with Andy from Giant Swarm about the rollouts. So that's the one kind of open question still, or open bug, I would say, that we need to fix. That's a more design foundational. Other than that, I would say we're in a good place. I don't think we intend on changing the API much. I think, I mean, we can have a separate discussion about this, but given that people are already using machine pools and relying on it as if it was graduated, I think the fair thing to do here is to graduate it. That doesn't mean we can't make changes to it or improve it in the future. It just means that we're saying we're not going to take it back, which I think at this point is, we all know that machine pools aren't going away, right? And a lot of the managed Kubernetes providers like AKS, EKS in Cluster API also rely on machine pools. And so not having machine pools graduated makes those managed Kubernetes clusters also experimental, right? Because they depend on an experimental feature. And I think it would be very beneficial to, CAPI adoption if we were able to graduate those. So I would say, yeah, let's talk about maybe graduating machine pools at some point. Doesn't mean we're not going to continue improving it, but I think we're in a good place now that we've done the machine pool machines and all of that.
That is awesome context. Thank you, Cecile. That answers a lot of my questions. And I guess I'll probably try to get more involved in some of those discussions just to see, as we learn more from the Carpenter side, there might be, kind of questions for the API side and whatnot, but that's perfect. Thank you. I saw Jack, you raised your hand, please.
Yeah, so speaking to your question about is machine pools the sort of sufficient interface for getting all the Carpenter inputs that are needed to build a provider, I'm not sure. I'm going to go ahead and go into the weeds a little bit, if that's okay with folks, because I see it's a light agenda and we've got lots of time. So apologies if this is a little bit into the weeds and you don't have context. But Mike, I'm not sure that machine pools are any different from machine deployments in terms of assuming a homogeneous horizontal replication set. And in that case, I think we're in the same position that we are with machines and machine deployments with respect to Carpenter, that we don't have a good way of representing heterogeneity and like spontaneity without just creating a sort of one-to-one, having that extra machine deployment wrapping in the machine case to represent, like, say, a single replica. And then so for a little context, Carpenter creates needed infrastructure for Kubernetes clusters, not in the traditional way that Cluster Autoscaler does, where you simply increment or decrement a replica of an existing spec, but rather it does some sort of eager runtime introspection and creates appropriate, efficient, cheap, eco-friendly machines from the provider's available capacity. And those might be, say, 4 machines, each of which is a totally different SKU type, however you want to describe a machine classification. So getting back to the machine pools versus machine deployments, I don't think that machine pools offer us any solution to that problem, Mike, that we were discussing in the prior meeting about just having that thin wrapper. So now, Carpenter provisions 5 new machines to fulfill infrastructure capacity. It chooses 5 different flavors, which results in 5 new machine pools, each with 1 replica. I think the same outcome would be present based on the data model of machine pools.
Right. Like if we take it as it is today, I guess this is where, and I'm going to take the swamp buggy deeper into the weeds at this point, but like this is where I was kind of looking at machine pools a little more aspirationally from the perspective of like, maybe in the future, what we want to do, because like some of what we've been talking about in the Carpenter feature group is like, Carpenter, although it's, many people think of it as a node autoscaler, it is also a provisioner of its own. It wants to sit very low level, like almost at the same level that Cluster API does. And so as we're trying to like bring these two pieces together and look at how they integrate, one of the thoughts that came up was maybe there's a way to have like a really solid integration where there's a controller from the Cluster API side that knows how to react to some of this. And so like to push a little further on this concept, when what I've been looking at in machine pools so far, what it made me wonder was like, I wonder if in the future, if we want to create this Carpenter contract, do we create like a Carpenter machine pool or something? And then providers who wanted to be able to provide that kind of integration through Cluster API could implement the controller for that. Now, this is just total speculation. this could be a completely bad idea what I'm talking about now, but as I'm investigating machine pools, I see that like machine pool has a lot of the information. Is there a way that that could be like improved so that it could be used by Carpenter? And I just wanted to get a general feeling of where the community was at with machine pools. So, hearing what Cecile had to say, like definitely gives me confidence that, there's going to be more here in the future.
Well, are you able to give some concrete examples of the kinds of information that you think machine pool and Carpenter are exposing in common, and how that differs from machine deployments?
Well, so the top thing I was thinking about was how machine pools, at least from the documentation, have an interface to like enumerate the instance types that are within them, right? And so and it seemed like machine pools had a way for you to actually configure to let it know what instance type should be in that machine pool. And so at the very basic level, one of the first things I was looking at was, programmatically speaking, when Carpenter uses its interface to ask about like instance types or whatever that it can, that it should know how to be able to create, that would at least be an interface point where a controller could look at a machine pool that has opted into scaling and say, okay, well, these are the instance types in that machine pool. I could now give those to Carpenter to say, these are the type of instances that I can make. Now, the next part that I'm less clear on is that, at some point, Carpenter is going to ask back and say, okay, I would like you to make an instance of type X, right? And so like that to me is a little more nebulous how that side of it would work right now. But like I was just looking at the data available and kind of saying, well, we've got the data we want here. Is there a way that we could kind of push forward with this?
Yeah, that's interesting. It would be fun to do a code dive with you, Mike, and see what you're seeing, because I'm hearing you express that you're seeing something that actually points towards possible heterogeneity in the existing machine pool spec for different types of instances in a single machine pool. Is that what, am I interpreting that right?
That's the impression I got from reading our docs. If it has changed since then maybe like I'm just going on bad information then.
Well, no, it's interesting. Let's think up about that at some point, because that surprises me that would be a thing that we could do without essentially totally evolving the machine pool spec.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, maybe I'm just like totally off base here on this then. Yeah, I'm just looking up I'm just looking at the docs I was looking at to see if is there something there that I was looking at that like maybe I should, that maybe I misread it or something,
Yeah, I think that due to the fact that machine pools and machine pool machines are really different data models and have different affinities compared to machine deployments and machines, I'm not aware that heterogeneity is something that you can kind of include in there, but it is possible that there's a path forward for that in machine pools. I think that it would be a little bit of we have to probably think about the original sort of intent for machine pools, because the original intent, as far as I can tell, was to create an abstraction that mapped fairly well to the cloud provider, the various cloud provider machine set services that are out there in the ecosystem. And so picking that particular data abstraction as the model to represent something like Carpenter is a bit non-intuitive just from a human perspective as to like, why was that? I think you can make the obvious case that like, well, it was easier to build a POC because we had that spec. We didn't have to build a new one.
Right.
That's not a great, like, durable answer.
Yeah. Well, I maybe, like I said, maybe, what I'm seeing now and I'm, like I'm looking at the machine pool page right now and it's like, maybe I'm just reading more into this, because it says like maintains a list of instances in the provider ID list field, creates new instances through a single infrastructure resource like VMSS or, ASGs and AWS. Like, to me, I thought some of those primitives could have heterogeneous instance types in them. So maybe I wishfully like kind of read into it. But I think that there's also maybe the possibility that maybe we would want to go further in the definition and say like, is there room to define a new API type, like a heterogeneous machine pool or something like that? I don't know. I'm still kind of like, my head's deep in this stuff and I'm trying to figure out like, what are the options available to us to make this work? Cecile, please.
Yeah, so I think you're right, Mike. They can. So the machine pools themselves are homogeneous right now in CAPI. And when they were designed at the time, Azure didn't support heterogeneous. I don't know if AWS did, but I know that now I can speak for Azure. Azure now has this orchestration mode called Flex for VMSS, which allows you to join heterogeneous instances into the scale sets. I'm pretty sure ASG also allows that. I think others might too, but I'd have to double check. So currently, CAPI machine pools only support homogeneous instances, but the cloud provider resources that those are abstracting do support heterogeneous instances. So I do think that I think there is something there that we could talk about how to support it at the CAPI level.
Yeah, I mean, that's encouraging to hear. Like, I think like what from the discussion that we had in the Carpenter feature group, and Jack and I were kind of talking about this. What if in the future, when we have some sort of, let's assume we have a CAPI integration or Carpenter integration with CAPI, and so like Carpenter is doing things in the cloud, it's scaling, and it's making machine resources at the very least, so that a user can see like, hey, these are the machines in my cluster, and maybe they all look different, maybe they're all different instance types, whatever. But it would, at that point though, like there becomes a question of like, okay, if you just have these, orphan machines, does it make sense if there's some owner that can have like this heterogeneous collection, and maybe machine pools is that, maybe it's not machine pools, maybe it's something yet to come or whatever. But that's kind of where I was thinking after Jack and I were talking. So I think it's Cecile first, then Fabrizio. So please, Cecile.
Yeah, I just want to respond to that, and also to what Daniel is saying in chat. So one thing is that when and sorry if this is very in the weeds, but if you're creating machines that are homogeneous with let's say VMSS or ASG, what you're doing is you're just scaling the replicate count from the cloud provider side, and then the cloud provider will create the instances and then report back to you. So you're not actually creating virtual machines or instances. That's different when you start going into like heterogeneous instances, where it's the opposite order of operation, where you first create the instance and then you join it to the scale set or ASG. And there's no way to scale up or have like replicate counts with heterogeneous instances because there's no templates. You're just creating standalone machines and joining them to a set. So to answer Daniel's question in chat, the core reason why we needed machine pools was that we delegate the creation of machines to the cloud provider, as opposed to Cluster API defining a template, then creating a instance, right, from that template. If we do go into heterogeneous, then I think there's too much overlap with machine deployments, where at that point, like a heterogeneous machine pool is a machine deployment, basically. And so it might be worth considering, do we want to have heterogeneous machine pools just be machine deployments with like a different mode or something?
Yeah.
And for some clouds, we might even want to just stop using standalone machines altogether and just use machine deployments that join into sets altogether. So yeah. Go ahead, Fabrizio.
Yeah, really interesting thoughts. Thanks, Cecile.
Yeah, I kind of agree with the latest two comments. So I think that we should always try to not put the complexity on cluster API users. So at the end, the user want to manage a set of machines, and we should, is not something for now, but I think that as the project matures, we should ideally have only one abstraction for a set of machine. And this abstraction can work in different modes. It could be managed directly machine. It could defer the management to a underlying cloud things. It could be mixed, heterogeneous or homogeneous. But at the end, the API should be really simple and only one for the user. So I kind of embrace Daniel's comment. I think that the issue is not that we want to allow to make it possible to use things that the cloud provider offers. Is that we have to make these simple for the user. So I think that the goal is not to introduce specific abstraction for everything exists in the cloud, but to make these homogeneous and simple. So it requires a little bit of this discussion, but I think that is our duty to handle the complexity in the code and not to make it complex for the users. I don't know if it makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense to me, Fabrizio. And this is kind of like one of the big things that's coming out of the feature group is that, you know, we've only met a couple of times, but one of the things we talked about is like, what is the goal from the cluster API side of things about this integration? And I think one of the things we agreed on is that cluster API users, we want them to continue to have kind of the cluster API experience that they had before. We don't want them just to kind of ignore all the cluster API and just, you know, carpenters doing everything. So I totally agree with what you're saying. And I love this notion of like, you know, making things simpler. So it's like, rather than having more types of collections of machines, maybe just have fewer types, but different modalities that they could work in. Like, I'm really curious to hear ideas around that and stuff. So like, I thank you for sharing that, Fabrizio. I think that's really important. Yeah, so I wanted to, I'll just like comment on what people are saying in the chat right now. So, you know, one of the things Jack said is like the real value proposition of Carpenter plus Cluster API is that if we design the abstraction right, we should be able to integrate with day one provisioner support for all existing CAPI providers. So one Carpenter solution that leverages existing provider implementations. I tend to agree with Jack's optimism here. Like it would be really awesome if we had a Carpenter that's like, okay, it can just use any CAPI provider. Now that may mean that the CAPI provider themselves has to do a little bit of work to, you know, to match whatever API we have there. But I think that would be amazing if we could just say, all right, yeah, you can have it on everything. So thanks for that, Jack. And awesome conversation. This really helped me out and kind of gives me some stuff to think about and research as we go into the next phases of this. So thanks everybody for participating in the ad hoc conversation. I'll pass the mic back to you, Richard. That's it for me.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. Great discussion. All right. I think that takes us through the end of the agenda. Are there any other topics folks want to raise while we have everybody here? All right. Cool. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Derek, I'm going to tag you in the Cluster API channel in Slack just so you know where that is. So you'll be getting a ping there soon. So have a good one, everybody.
Cool. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
Thanks.